Good present, actually, for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel. Warm welcome. It is me, Bev Turner, in the 8 o'clock slot all week. We've got a great show lined up for you tonight, along with some great company. I've got my panellists this evening, Kelvin Mackenzie, former editor of The Sun, and political commentator Aaron Bastani, joining me to discuss some very controversial topics this evening. Remember Tony Blair, William Hague, two of our former politicians who just can't help themselves when it comes to weighing in on matters, despite being, what, totally irrelevant? Well, they both just called for an overhaul in our public sector, rolling in digital identification. Bit sinister, I reckon so. It's been ruled also today that the revoking of Shamima Begum's citizenship is lawful. Some would disagree and argue that her human rights take precedence over national security. I'm going to be debating that with my panel later. So the already contentious smart motorways had a not too tech smart blunder today. The smart system crashed for 2 hours, would you believe, leaving the majority of the UK's motorways in a signal blackout and motorists sitting like ducks. If the smart motorway already caused 60+ deaths whilst operating, how many more blackouts till we see more casualties? This poses the question, is tech really that smart? We're going to be debating that later on. And a transgender cartoonist who is admitted, it's not a secret, she's admitted to indulging in a nappy, and that's right, nappy, not happy, nappy fetish art, is going to be speaking at a family event in Sheffield about her book on growing up trans. We're going to be digging into that. Most importantly, send me your thoughts and questions, gbviews@gbnews.uk, all after the headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Bev, thank you. Good evening. The top story. The Defence Secretary says Challenger 2 battle tanks could arrive in Ukraine by spring. Ben Wallace has visited an army base in Dorset, where Ukrainian soldiers are being trained on standard British tanks. The UK has already promised to send 14 to Ukraine, but Mr Wallace says Britain could offer up additional tanks, depending on the threat level and country's defence needs.
Their determination to see this through is extraordinary. Their work ethos, their spirit is inspiring to the instructors you speak to. And, you know, I think they are going to take the skills they've learned here and apply them in battle and not only keep themselves safe, but also make sure that they push back Russia's illegal invasion.
The Prime Minister has said he'll deliver certainty, stability and clarity as he seeks a deal on post-Brexit arrangements in Northern Ireland. Rishi Sunak held talks with the Northern Irish business leaders today amid renewed pressure to achieve a workable solution to the stalled Northern Ireland Protocol. Earlier, he told the Commons intensive talks with the EU are ongoing. And in a GB News exclusive, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, said Mr Sunak is absolutely committed to resolving the issue.
I actually think if you look historically at how our deals and agreements have been reached with the EU, it's important that we take a robust approach. We need to, my clear preference is for us to reach a workable and pragmatic agreement with the EU. I know that the Prime Minister shares that objective, and I know that he's working flat out to reach such an agreement whilst not compromising on our sovereignty.
Tesco is the latest supermarket to introduce a limit on how much fresh produce customers can buy, as fruit and vegetable shortages are leaving shelves bare. The retailing giant joins Aldi, Asda and Morrisons in temporarily rationing shopping, with purchases of tomatoes, peppers and cucumbers limited to 3 per customer as a precaution. Bad weather and transport problems across Europe and North Africa are being blamed for the disruption to supply lines, with retailers warning the problems could last for weeks. Now, Lancashire Police say it welcomes the forthcoming independent review into its handling of the Nicola Bulley case. The College of Policing will focus on the investigation and the search and release of personal information, as well as the force's engagement with the public. Separately, the police regulator will investigate a welfare check carried out on Miss Bulley just weeks before she went missing. Her body was recovered from the River Wye on Sunday, more than 3 weeks after she disappeared. And finally, His Majesty the King has held an audience with the President of the German Parliament ahead of a trip to Germany later this month. King Charles will become the first British monarch to address the Bundestag during a state visit to the country, welcomed Barbara Buss to Buckingham Palace this afternoon. The trip will follow on from a state visit to France, which is due to be the King's first official trip abroad since his accession to the throne. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now Bev Turner.
Very good evening. I hope you're sitting comfortably. Let's talk about ID cards. So in Germany, they were first introduced by the Nazis in 1938. In Italy, it's the fascist government that brought them in 1931. Franco foisted them on the Spaniards in the 50s. In France, too, it was the Nazi puppet government that gets them in during the war. Well, in March 2020, when Boris Johnson thumped his fist on the desk and said, "You must stay at home," some of us became hyper-vigilant to what exactly was going on. We watched as controlling measures were dictated to us, such as scientifically discredited masks, walking around Tesco in one direction, and then needing a QR code indicated compliance with a government-mandated drug to get into a restaurant. All over a virus, statistically less lethal to the under-70s, ultimately, than flu. We were being primed, and today we got there. The front page of the Times newspaper finally announcing cross-party intentions for a digital identification system. So what? You shrug. Sounds quite convenient. Beware the appeal of convenience in a world where nothing works, food is unavailable and cash is no longer accepted. William Hague and Tony Blair, two blokes that position themselves politically as sensible centrists, have been chosen to sell this snake oil. There is nothing centrist about digital ID. As Peter Hitchens often points out, the state should, and historically was, the one to identify itself to the citizen. ID cards, controlled effectively by a centralised monopoly, turn this relationship on its head. Conspiracy theorists, people yelled at the likes of me who dared to do some research and stick up for freedoms that we were all in favour of just a few years ago. Hague and Blair, on the other hand, think they can go completely unchallenged on ideas with such a terrible history. Do we really trust these people to have even more power over us? At best, our betters have shown themselves to be horrifically incompetent recently. At worst, they've got an agenda that they wish to hide. Scary migrants, scary diseases, scary globe-trotting terrorists, scary planet-destroying humans. Just step into my digital ID matrix and it will all go away, as will our lives as we know it. Well, here to give us his opinion is Chris Phillips, former senior police officer with particular expertise in counter-terrorism. So, Chris, are we actually going to be safer, really? And is the cost to our private lives really worth it?
Yeah, well, to a great extent there, I completely agree with you, Bev. I don't like the thought of this. However, we also have to be realistic, and the world is changing very quickly. And we've already got ID systems in our pocket. Everyone walking around with a mobile phone has everything on them that can identify them, where they've been, what they've been doing, who they've been talking to, what drugs they're taking, etc., etc. So I'm probably not quite as worried about it as you are.
It's
However,
completely different.
I don't like the idea. Sorry?
It's completely different. And this is what I think, there's a huge misunderstanding about this today. And I put on Twitter and I put out there, you know, give me a list of what's wrong with centralised digital ID. And a lot of people came back and said, I don't really understand it. I don't really understand how this is going to change my life. One way they're going to sell this to us, Chris, and this is your area of expertise, is about safety. This is for your safety. How? Just explain to us why having our life on our phone, which is what it will be, it won't be an ID card you carry in your pocket anymore. It will have all of our information. So at the moment, our shopping history is in one area, our NHS information is in another, our tax is in another, our NHS details are in another. But this is about putting it all together in one easily accessible place, potentially with conditions attached to go about normal life. Is that going to be safer? I don't feel that makes us safer. I think that makes me more vulnerable.
I think you're right, exactly. But there are circumstances, of course, where we have people who, A, work in the black economy, A, don't want to be identified. And we've got an awful lot of people that are in our country that shouldn't be here for one reason or another. So, from a policing perspective, which is not what you want to hear, really, I can see some benefits in this identifying very, very bad people and what they're up to. But I really don't like the whole concept of this. And in particular, this is a movement towards this digital money as well, which I think is a very difficult situation. And I think people need to work out where we're going to go with this, because there are, of course, the issues that we're going to face over the coming generation with AI and what that means for humankind. I think there's, this is a big picture thing that we all need to understand more about.
It really is. I mean, in terms of terrorism as well, of course, what I always say to people about digital ID, imagine the politician that you least like. Imagine the politician that winds you up the most, and imagine them being in charge of the government and being able to decide what you can and can't do, what you can and can't buy, where you can and can't go, who you can and can't see, based on their idea of what is a security risk. Now, in the last 3 years, a lot of us had our parameters challenged in terms of what we would do, which was outside of the law, whether that was meeting up with your mother on a park bench when you weren't actually allowed to, or having some teenagers in the garden having a few beers. It was a time for people who are normally very good and law-abiding like me to stretch those boundaries. Now, you put somebody in charge of this digital ID system who has boundaries which you don't agree with, we can have our lives literally turned off at the flick of a switch. And so I don't feel it's going to make me any safer. Like I say, I feel it's going to make us much more vulnerable. And in terms of the terrorism angle, Chris, let me just ask you, for instance, the Manchester Arena bombers, they were born here. They would have already had their digital ID. It wouldn't have stopped an attack like that, would it?
No, it really wouldn't have done. What we do have to bear in mind, though, is that there are some people that do need to be put under surveillance, and he would have been one of them. And, of course, this would help that. But, I think we're on the same side here, really, Bev. But there are some benefits in the policing perspective, in the tax perspective, in the control of government. But you're quite right. How much power are we as individuals going to give over to government and to policing, etc., to supposedly keep us safe? But I think this whole AI thing needs, real consideration as well, because we are going to be doing things differently over the next few years. And the one thing I would say to you is that people of my generation are much less likely to want to have digital IDs than some of the young people who don't seem to worry too much about giving information out and giving their ID out to the world through their computer and their phones.
You can guarantee that as we talk, there'll be a basement somewhere in the UK, potentially with a gang of Albanians in it, working out how they're going to hack the system. Because if you've got all of your information in one place, that must render you more vulnerable to identification theft, to somebody being able to access your money. And this is where my knowledge dries up, OK? I'm no expert in terms of how easy it is going to be to hack these things. But we've been living in a time where we had to shred our bank statements before we put them in the bin or anything, because digital and identity theft was so easy. It's got easier as we've gone more online. We're more liable to be scammed. We're more liable to have details of ours taken and used in nefarious ways. Tony Blair, of course, like you say, was getting very excited today about AI, and William Hague. They love this. There's sort of like there's a type of technocratically minded man at the moment, Chris, who is just so excited to see these measures being forced through at a rate of knots that I just don't think the British public are ready for. Let me cast your mind back. Let me tap into your experience then as an officer of the law for many years. You can probably remember, I can just about remember, some of the debates around ID cards, because we've always been a country that pushed right back. Can you remember some of the arguments that we used at the time for why we didn't need ID cards?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are lots of ways that we have identification, aren't there? There's very few of us that couldn't easily be identified. The people that don't want to be identified are a different matter altogether. And just take you to a slightly different thing as well, is that crime is now enormous. It's big business. And you're quite right to say that that criminals will be looking at this immediately as a means of making money. And they're doing that already. And of course, any form of ID can be used by other people that for criminal purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. Criminals are looking at this in how to make money. I saw Tony Blair, he's one of them. He was announcing it this morning. I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. There's no doubt that him and all his mates are going to profit. There is profits to be made in this. And this is before we've even talked about it being tied to your health status and whether you've had too many calories that week, whether you've spent too much. And as you say, it will be tied to a centralised banking digital currency. And then life as we know it is over. Chris, I can't have you here without asking you one quick question about the Shamima Begum trial today. Do you think it was the right decision for her not to have her citizenship reinstated?
Yeah, absolutely. She is a danger. She's been a danger. She did it all quite willingly. The people that are victims, she's been made out to be a victim in all this. The victims are actually the Yazidis that were put into slaves and all the people that were murdered by her and her friends and colleagues in ISIS. She's a criminal. We don't need her back in this country.
Yeah, we got enough of those already. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. Former head of National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, Chris Phillips there. Now, we just discussed it. Shamima Begum, she is not coming back, is she? Was it the right decision? We've got Novara Media's Aaron Bastani and Fleet Street legend Kelvin McKenzie to battle that one out. All coming up after the break. Don't go anywhere.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview channel 236.
And YouView channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Bev Turner sitting in at the 8 o'clock slot all week. Now, today, the Special Immigration Appeals Commission ruled that the decision to revoke Shamima Begum's citizenship by the then Home Secretary Sajid Javid is lawful. Shamima's lawyers argued that the Secretary of State had failed to respect her human rights by failing to consider that she might have been trafficked to Syria for sexual exploitation. But it's been argued that the security of the United Kingdom takes precedence. Well, to discuss this, I have security and intelligence expert from the University of Buckingham, Professor Jonathan Glees. Good evening, Professor. Welcome. Your reflections, please, first of all, on this announcement today. It was very popular with the public.
Well, I think it's the right decision. It's very important that what a government does, what a Home Secretary does, is lawful. And the judges have decided that it was lawful to strip her of her British citizenship. I think many people will say, well, this is a tragic case. She wants to come back to Britain and see her family, and it's a tragedy for them. Of course, it's a far greater tragedy for the people who suffered at the hands of the brutal sadists who call themselves the Islamic State, people she deliberately and voluntarily went out to support. And my anxiety really is that she will either try to come back or that they will now appeal against this further appeal. And it will go on and on and on, because there's no doubt in my mind that she is a very dangerous woman. And I say that because there is no sign at all that she feels remorse, that she has any understanding really of the awful things that the so-called Islamic State did. And the argument that she was the victim of trafficking, that's an argument that sort of popped up out of nowhere in 2021. She first said she now thinks that she's been trafficked. At the time, it was her own decision, and that's the end of it.
Does it mean anything to you that she was 15? Like, 15-year-old girls think they know everything and they know nothing. I have a few teenagers in my house. They know right from wrong. They wouldn't have got on a plane to go and join a terrorist cult. However, the argument that her side have made is that she was a vulnerable young girl.
Well, that is said, and the judges said arguably there was a case that she wasn't properly safeguarded. I must say, when I was 15, I was actually quite in control of my own life, and I decided what I wanted to do, and I can remember what it felt like to be 15. Shamima seems to me to be somebody who was actually a rather strong person and resolved to go out. People will recall she said she hated the British life that she felt forced to live. She hated it. She felt constricted by British life and British values, which is why she chose to go to the most conservative Islamic state in the world. She chose that. So I think it was deliberate. And when she chose to do so, it was deliberate. Now, there is an argument. You can say she was a kid. That's what the law says. She is a kid. It's very complicated. And, what's a child and what isn't a child? And it could well be that, somebody should have said to her, possibly her family, who've been quick to blame absolutely everybody but themselves, she should have been prevented from going. But the truth is, she was very determined. She did it all. She herself said, it wasn't an idea she had just like that. She said it was the result of long deliberation. So to restrain somebody like that, I think, is difficult. And what are you going to do, lock her up?
Well, if she came back here, of course, that would be one of the potential outcomes. Very difficult to build a case, though, presumably, on crimes which happened in a lawless state many years ago.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's why the call to bring her back is actually a call for her to escape justice. I know people say, she's British, let her have the benefit of the British courts. As I say, she's rejected British values. She threw her British passport away in 2015. And I think her supporters realise that if she were to come to Britain, there couldn't be a trial. After all, most of the victims of what she and her chums did in Syria and Iraq are now dead. So, you couldn't have a trial. You mustn't make somebody stateless in English law. She's not been made stateless. There are 150 other people who also, in similar circumstances, been rightly stripped of their British citizenship. It's a privilege to be, a Brit, and I'm sure all of us wake up every morning saying, thank God we're not in Ukraine or in Syria or Iraq. So somebody who wants to do a serious damage deliberately, that they should then come back. And even if she were sent to prison, as I said, it's most unlikely, but even if she were sent to prison, she would be a kind of jihadist icon like Roshan or a Chowdhury who tried to assassinate Stephen Timms MP. We're told she is an icon of jihadist prisoners in our jails, of whom there are far too many. So no, absolutely the right decision. I fear, though, it will be appealed and it will go on and on and on for some time.
That was the latest today, that she will appeal. Professor Jonathan Glees, thank you so much for joining me. Also with me this evening, Novara Media's Aaron Bastani is here. Fleet Street legend. Kelvin McKenzie also. Right, Aaron, let me come to you first. You were listening to that interview. Do you have some sympathy for the fact that she was a child? She was, well, they say she was trafficked. She was certainly groomed, I would say, to go, because she was 15. However, I don't know whether you saw the interview that she did when she did. Did you see her on the BBC, the programme? What was your impression of her from that? Because I watched that as well and I thought she was deeply untrustworthy.
My view on this is it's immaterial. She's a British national. I think she should face a British court and British justice. Whether people think that she hasn't done anything wrong or she was trafficked or groomed, these are all opinions. The facts are she's a British national, she's a subject of Her Majesty's government or His Majesty's government, and so she should face the court in this country. That's my view. If a British judge could preside over a court prosecuting Goering and Albert Speer after the Second World War, I think we can handle Shamima Begum.
Of course, the argument is, because of her family lineage, she could have Bangladeshi citizenship. The Bangladeshis have said, yeah, we'll have her, but we'll try her and we'll execute her. That's why we're in this holding pattern, isn't it?
I'm not familiar with the Bangladeshi dual nationality thing. As I understand it, she is stateless presently. So I don't know about that.
Let me come to you, Kelvin. I imagine you have a rather different opinion.
Well, she has flip-flopped as she has seen which way the wind was going. When she was first discovered in 2015 by the Times, or 2019, I think, actually, by the Times, her view was, actually, I don't regret anything. There was a head in the bucket and that was it. And by the way, I married a terrorist and I had 3 children, which I lost, and I went with other terrorists, and this was my life, and actually it was bloody good. Then either her family or the lawyers came to her and said, well, if you're ever going to come back here, you're going to have to go the other way. Then she started saying, I was groomed, it was terrible, it was this, it was that. This was a girl of 15 with enough resource to get out to Turkey, then take the bus and get into Syria. This is not the normal 15-year-old down at your local comp. The truth about the matter is that she has made a big mistake. The issue about today's judgment is there are enough holes in that judgment, to my mind, having now read it all, that not only will the appeals go on, I guarantee you, when Labour come to power in 2024-25, whenever it is, I guarantee you she's back in this country facing some very small charge and she'll be out in 3 to 5 years. It is an absolute shocker. And one of the issues is we might end up, this may end up, keep on going on and on and up, we might end up at the European Court of Human Rights. Imagine if we, the country, didn't want her to be here, but some European social do-gooders said, you've got to allow her in. I hesitate to think what the politics on that would be.
It'd be nice to know the detail, wouldn't it, Aaron, as to why she's still considered to be a security risk, because that's why she lost this case today. We can't know that, of course.
Well, I think there's a strange logic here which is contradictory. On the one hand, we're being told there is insufficient evidence for her to probably go down for a long time. And on the other hand, there's sufficient evidence that she's a security risk.
There is a paradox.
I don't quite get that. And I'm sure there's plenty of evidence, frankly, that would send her down for a very long time. Otherwise, this argument doesn't make sense.
Well, maybe they think that obviously a lot of radicalisation happens in prisons. Could that be part of it? They don't want her in prison with the celebrity status, the world's most famous.
We don't want her back at all.
ISIS.
She made her bed, right? And she chose to lie in it with a terrorist and to lie in it with a terrorist group. And by the way, none of this would be happening now were it not the fact that in Syria, the ISIS were roundly defeated. So suddenly, when she was a winner, everything's fine. Now she's defeated. She said, I tell you what, forget about northern Syria. I'm coming back to the UK. And it's at that point that I say, no, you've decided what to do. And honestly, I also think it's a good example to other potential 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds who fancy going this way. When you make that journey, you are saying goodbye to your country, and
Aaron,
just as well.
What did you make of her current PR campaign? I mean, I'd love to hear your opinion on this as well, Kelvin, as a former editor of a newspaper. The fact that she's had a documentary series funded by the BBC, a podcast series, I Am Not a Monster, funded by the BBC, funded by us, the taxpayer. The fact that she had the front cover of the Times, I think it was the Times,
It was
the Times, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The Times Weekend magazine, the best-selling supplement in the country. What do you make of that?
Well, it's clearly effective. And look, people in the media game do it because it sells. It's an interesting story. So on the one hand, yes, of course, it benefits her, but it benefits the people selling the newspapers or selling adverts on whatever news network there is. Again, like I say, I would want to draw back from that and say, justice is blind. You go to the Old Bailey, you see justice on top of it, and she's wearing a blindfold. And Kelvin's saying many valid things. I don't disagree with any of them. I certainly wouldn't want to live next door to her.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's how you run a legal system. There's a great documentary. If you go on YouTube, your viewers can see this Pathé footage from the trials, the trials, the Nuremberg trials after 1945, and they're saying contrast the illegality and criminality of the Nazi regime with British justice. Why can't we do that now?
Kelvin?
First of all, I don't think you can equate 6 million Jews being wiped out with what this girl wanted to do. What she was in essence a terrorist herself. I don't see why we have to expend one single penny on bringing her through the justice system. The people who are benefiting out of this, of course, as always in all these things, are the lawyers. The lawyers, I hesitate to think what this bill... I think the bill for this alone is 5 million, right?
Wow.
It is an enormous amount of money to our expense. But actually, in a funny way, it's a signal. You as a devout Muslim, wants to go out there and fight with the terrorists, will say goodbye to your country, rather than allow them to flip-flop on the way in. And on the question of how she transferred herself. So 1 minute she's in a niqab and there's all the pictures taken of that. The next minute, she looks like a Vogue cover girl.
She does. If that had come across your desk as the editor, though, it would be very hard to say no to it, wouldn't it, to put her on the cover of that magazine?
To put her on the cover of the magazine. Well, actually, I was against that. I felt personally hostile to that. If you had I run a paper like The Sun, right, I would have run the two pictures side by side, right, and stuck that on page one. That would have got people thinking. I know I didn't enjoy that, to be honest with you. No. And I felt that she was that we were being manipulated by her lawyers or by somebody. I mean, where is all this money coming from?
I find that fascinating. I do find it really interesting. Who is so invested in her story that they are prepared, apart from what we can see the BBC, that they are prepared to pay for the photo shoots, the camera crews to go out there? Who is doing that? It can only be the BBC.
Well, do you know, I'm told actually it's the journalist. But what happens is when they turn up to take a picture of her or something like that, she always says, Lee, give me a baseball cap, give me this, give me that, give me some money for this and that. And of course, if you're a journo, if that's the price of getting the story, then that's it.
Yeah.
Look, I think she's a very clever woman. A very, very clever woman. And
she can't be that clever. She's in a bit of a pickle, isn't she?
Well, I'm glad she's in a pickle.
But she can't be that clever then, can she?
I thought she was quite thick. I can't lie. When I saw her on the interview, I thought, everyone's been telling me you're an academic overachiever. She sounds sort of half-baked.
No.
To be honest, she did sound quite thick on the interview, didn't you think?
No.
I try not to judge.
No, I don't think so.
You think she was hiding it?
I think she's being clever.
She's
very, very clever. And I actually think Damn clever to get out there.
There's a reason why I haven't edited a national newspaper for 20 years. You did, Kelvin.
Yes.
I'll believe anything.
You wouldn't want to, let me tell you.
Right, now, thank you, guys. Coming up, can a motorway really be called smart when a system failure leaves it unusable for several hours? We're going to be talking about that, and we're going to touch on strikes as well with these two. Stay tuned.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Welcome back to the 8 o'clock slot. I think they're still calling it Laurence Fox. It won't be for much longer, though. But it's me, Bev Turner. I'm normally on at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, it emerged today that large parts of the UK's smart motorway network suffered a power outage, which crucially froze the stopped vehicle detection system. Now, sounds a bit dull, but actually this is incredibly important because this smart system is frankly just not working. Right, Kelvin, for people who aren't familiar with what the smart motorway system is, these motorways now, there's no hard shoulder, and so you have these digital signs above the lanes, and there's a bloke I presume a few blokes, maybe some women as well, but they're sat there watching the roads, and if a car breaks down, they have to quickly put a red cross in the lane so that everybody who isn't looking at their phone while they're driving can actually move lanes and get out of the way. 8:30 till 10:30 this morning, the whole system broke down. Doesn't this just show that it's not fit for purpose?
Well, I'm not sure. Did anybody actually get hurt?
No, but I think for over the last, I think there's about 70 deaths so far that have been on smart motorways because people have broken down in the hard shoulder, but there isn't a hard shoulder, in the slow lane. Trucks have gone into the back of them.
How many died prior to having a a Red Cross in the lane. I mean, it may have been 700. I don't know. Actually, I think when you talk about smart motorways, the biggest issue on the roads there is the totally mad driving skills of people wanting to swing from the one lane into the other. That will kill a lot more people than the smart motorways, in my view.
What do you think, Aaron?
I'm a huge sceptic. I live in Portsmouth. You've got the M27 Portsmouth to Southampton. It's about 13 kilometres. It's going to cost the taxpayer £244 million. Go to Fratton train station and see the state of it. Or look at buses in Portsmouth or Southampton, or where I'm from, Bournemouth originally. Go to Folkestone train station. I'm a Bournemouth boy. AFC Bournemouth football stadium. That's the nearest train station. The first thing away fans see when they come to Bournemouth, frankly, is a hole. And yet we're spending £250 million on this smart motorway. So I think for me, it's one of those things where it's not just a waste of money, it's making things worse at great expense.
Yeah, it is. Great expense, incredibly dangerous. And as we see, when the tech doesn't work, then people are left even more vulnerable. Right. Strikes, fellas.
Strikes.
Talk about strikes, Kelvin Mackenzie?
Good idea.
You're a big fan of strikers, aren't you? You're incredibly supportive of them. They have your full backing.
Yeah, they have none of my backing. They're using our pain collectively to increase their pay. They are in unique positions to do that. So you decide to go on strike, apart from there being probably a round of applause by the management. Nobody cares, do they? Nobody cares.
You're joking. I'm hosting 2 shows a day at the moment. Who else would be willing to work that hard?
Well, clearly you want that bloke from the RMT representing you. But the truth about the matter, it is massively painful. We have doctors going on strike. I see those guys... the London Underground are going on strike on March 15, so it coincides with the budget. We have these nurse negotiations, which are now going to open up. We have border force. Anybody going through? My brother came in from the Caribbean somewhere, went through Heathrow. He shot through Heathrow in about 34 seconds, right, without border force. So
the military stepped in.
So everything was working. I want us to tough everybody out. We've now seen Citigroup have announced tonight what they think inflation will look like in our country. 5% in July, 2% in November, because of the collapse of energy prices. I urge, all right, I may not be the world's greatest fan of Sunak. I urge him now, he's gone on this path, just stay with this. And the RMT can still be out on strike in November, as far as I'm concerned. When we went through COVID, we suddenly discovered that nobody can kill us in the way that they thought they could before. I'm old enough to believe that the idea when trains went out was an absolute disaster for the country. Now, oh, really, not running today? Oh, we'll do something else.
From home, absolutely. Go on, Aaron, what do you think?
Well, I think, look, public servants in this country, let's start with nurses. You're looking at the end of next year, the average nurse will be 20% poorer off than they would have been in 2010. We've got a shortage in this country of 47,000 nurses. 3 and 4 shifts are short-staffed because you can't recruit people when they're not being paid enough. So I think clearly with nurses, I think even a right-wing government, frankly, would be sensible enough to give them a decent pay rise, at least in line with inflation. Have to say as well, we had this news yesterday, the budget actually has brought in 30 billion more than we realised. So actually, a lot of these pay rises can be paid for without going into further spending. So I think NHS, we absolutely have to do it. I think teachers makes perfect sense. But the fundamental thing for me is walk down a high street. You know, again, I live in Portsmouth. Or I go to see my dad in Bournemouth.
Are you getting paid to say that, by the way?
Oh, yeah. Portsmouth Tourist, well, that's it.
Portsmouth Tourist Association.
No, but it's an important
place.
It's an important point, which is high streets across this country have been battered. And it's because people don't have money in their pockets.
Yeah.
And if you're saying that people have to get permanently poorer and pay rises can't keep up with inflation year after year after year after year, my dad's a taxi driver. If people aren't getting pay rises in line with inflation, they're less likely to take a taxi. So it's sensible economics to at least see pay in line with inflation.
Do you know, have you seen that the holiday companies announced record bookings higher than the pandemic? My high street, completely rammed
But you're in
single
Weybridge.
Every single coffee house.
That has the most millionaires in the country, though, Calvin.
Well,
that's not typical.
I'm pleased to be one of them.
Well, I'm sure you are.
I'm trying to avoid being skinned.
I'm sure you are, but that's not the average person watching this.
Seriously, the high street's completely packed. Everybody's going on holiday. You're going to see car sales are going to uptick dramatically. The idea that this is a totally skint nation is completely wrong.
I've been having those same observations. I know what you mean. You go in, the queue out of Tesco's tonight was like round the block. I think everyone's queuing so they can get more than one cucumber at a time, or the people are stockpiling peppers all of a sudden. And I keep looking, and the restaurants that I know of, some of them have been. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said we're getting loads of bookings, and I'm like, where's everyone getting their money from? Is it because I know that things are more expensive? Our energy bills are crippling. Do you think people are just going into debt, Aaron? Are people just getting lots of stuff on credit card at the moment?
I think a big part of it is
payments. Lots of mortgage payments.
Oh my God,
crazy.
I think a big part of it is after COVID, people probably want to enjoy life a bit more. So I don't know the stuff about holidays. Probably people have deferred holidays. I think that's perfectly plausible. But generally speaking, I mean, I grew up in the 90s, early 90s.
Was it?
No, Bournemouth. But the point was, these high streets, they were great places. Yeah. There were shops, they were exciting places to be.
Yeah.
Now, frankly, they look like they've been battered by the Luftwaffe, right? They look like they've genuinely been attacked by people.
Yeah, I was down there at Brighton at the weekend, and I was shocked at the state of that.
OK, well, let me just put in one for the Weybridge High Street Association to say, actually, a lot of shops have shut and new shops have taken over. And do you know what? They've gone up market, not down market. I am surprisised about that.
In Weybridge?
Yes. Well, I can only...
It's not Rochdale or Carlisle or Exeter.
Well, in Chiswick, which is supposed to be quite posh, they closed the McDonald's and opened a Poundland.
There you go.
It's not happening everywhere, you see.
Cost of living crisis.
I think, but anyway, getting back to the important point, I really seriously hope that the government hang on. We've been through some painful times. Inflation is going to go down. Deals are to be done with these people. I want them to be done. None of us are going to get inflation-proof pay rises. That's for the birds, unless we want to have inflation for 1,000 years.
Kelvin, Aaron, thank you for now. Now, coming up, a local council has invited a trans woman who fetishises, terrible word, human-looking animals in diapers. Yeah, you need to diapers. We're not America, it's nappies. To speak at a family event about her art. I'm going to be speaking to trans teacher Debbie Hayton about that next. Don't go anywhere. First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Laurence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News. The keen-eyed amongst you will see that I am not indeed Laurence Fox, but I am Bev Turner. Now, news that Sheffield Council has invited a transgender cartoonist that indulges in something called diaper fur art to speak at a family event has gone viral. Sophie LaBelle, who refuses to be slammed for her fetish, will be speaking at a family event in Sheffield's Central Library, where she's going to be talking about her new book in which she details her interest in art and activism. Now, it's caused a bit of a stir because this is effectively an evolution of something called drag queen storytime, which you might be familiar with. So joining me now to discuss this is trans teacher and activist Debbie Hayton. Good evening, Debbie. Great to see you. Thank you for joining me on this. Now, we invited Sophie, of course, to speak about this tonight, but we haven't heard back from her. So I don't know if you're familiar with Sophie and who she is and what she does, but can you just explain a little bit to our viewers and listeners about her interests and what she will be doing in Sheffield?
Sophie LaBelle is from Montreal in Canada and is a cartoon artist who sold work, cartoon work. Sophie identifies as trans, so as transitioned, identifies as transgender, and that tied in with the nappy fetish, as you called it, just creates huge questions. Miriam Cates MP, I think, used the term red flags.
She used the word what? Sorry.
Used the term red flags. Did Miriam Cates?
Yeah.
About it. This is raising red flags. My own view is we can go beyond the nappy fetish. Just seems distasteful, and who on earth thinks that this is a good role model for children? I just don't understand. But Sophie's work is politically persuasive. Sophie writes about empowering trans youth. You know, this is a politically persuasive campaign. It's not just art.
So how do you think she's got it past Sheffield Council to go to this event and to be reading and giving her book to children?
Well, it's transgender, isn't it? I've sometimes said I've been campaigning on trans issues now for 6 or 7 years. I'm concerned about the way in which the trans people have been used in this. We've seen women's rights being attacked. Any man who wants to invade women's spaces can just identify as trans. What we're seeing here now is this breach of boundaries with children as well. And by playing this transgender card, people seem to be able to do what they please.
So it's almost like transgender people have become a protected species to which different rules apply.
Well, protected species or priestly class in some... it just sometimes feels like a quasi-religious movement we're seeing here, where a group of people just cannot be denied what they want to do. It just seems to me to be totally bizarre. We talk about trans rights, and trans rights are human rights. Well, they are, but we're normal human beings like everybody else.
Well, this trans person, Sophie, she talks about her penchant for diaper art. She's insisted, I have a kink I indulge in responsibly and I refuse to be shamed by it. And she's talking about, I mean, I really hope, this is sort of adult appropriate content, but in other words, she's sexually aroused by the concept of wearing a nappy and being with somebody else who's also wearing a nappy. I mean, this is nothing if not a mind-expanding experience for me as well. And of course, Miriam Cates has said this is, as she said, it's a safeguarding issue. Who is putting protections in place for these children?
Yeah, well, yes, we have boundaries in place. We have safeguarding involves boundaries. We have boundaries in place between adult sexualities and children, and this just breaches those boundaries.
Well, you are so full of common sense, Debbie. It's always an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Journalist Debbie Hayton there giving us her opinion on that. All sounds good. Right, Dan, how are you? Dan Wootton, are you there?
Good evening, Ben. Yes, indeed, I am. And we will be continuing the conversation that you had earlier in the show about the Shamima Begum decision. Andrew Jury, he's the man who knows her best, has spent lots of time with Begum in Syria, and he says she's been lying to the British public. No way she should be allowed back. And it's really angering me, Bev, how no one is talking about the victims of ISIS either. So Bethany Haynes is going to be with us too. She is the daughter of David Haynes, who was, of course, the British aid worker beheaded by ISIS.
Fantastic. And I'm sure, like me, you're delighted to hear that Tony Blair's pushing through digital IDs today.
Oh, I'll be talking about that too, my God, with William Hague.
Right. Good luck, Dan. I will be watching. Thank you for watching tonight. I will be back on GB News in my normal slot of 10 o'clock tomorrow morning and also 8 o'clock tomorrow night. Sleep well.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Showers will clear south overnight, with clear spells in the north, leading to a frosty morning for Scotland, Northern Ireland and parts of northern England. But for southern parts of the UK, we'll see the continuation of some showers. Those showers are moving, associated with this occluded front, into central and then southern parts of the UK. So a slice of cloud, outbreaks of rain